I have listened to Michael Afton's monologue an unhealthy number of times. Not like in preparation for making this video or anything, just because I really like it. As a result of my obsession with this cutscene, as well as just this character in general, I have studied and scrutinized every second of it, probably harder than even your average FNAF theorist would. Disclaimer, this is a joke. Please do not tell any actual FNAF theorists that I said that. They would definitely laugh at me. The spoken word in FNAF has always been beautifully written in my opinion. This and Henry's speeches in 6 are shining examples of that. Even just on paper, these scripts are able to tell you so much about a character. And then you bring in voice acting, and you're adding on an entire extra layer of meaning and emotion these scenes are able to convey. Here's something the voice actor for William and Michael Afton, PJ Haywood, was able to glean from the opening of Sister Location, which I never really thought about.
That sequence was good writing because it was very clear that whatever question they were asking, William was not answering.
There are just certain design choices that were made for these robots that we don't fully understand. We were hoping that you could shed some light on those.
She can dance. She can sing.
So that gave you an insight into what his character was like. Even without knowing any of the backstory, you could see that William was one prone to not being fully honest at all times.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe this was obvious to everyone, and I was too distracted by the Afton name drop to notice.
Mr. Afton.
But it made me wonder if that same principle applied to Michael Afton, if there's any subtext within this monologue that gives insight into his personality. So, let's find out, by reading deep into every second of this cutscene. Maybe a little too deep. Like, stupidly deep. That being said, I don't think anything discussed here will have any implications for the lore or theory crafting. Certainly not anything the community hasn't already figured out by now. Just expect a lot of mindless gushing and rambling. One thing I like about this cutscene is how it's able to toe the line between melancholic and creepy. This is due in part to the backing track, but also the voice acting. The song that plays is titled Demolition Inevitable, which to me invokes a sense of macabreness, if that's a word, making it a very fitting song to be associated with the Afton family. The low-key melody of the piano sets a somber atmosphere, but there are also sound cues that help it feel unsettling and foreboding. A wailing siren can faintly be heard in the beginning, as well as the iconic notes of the song Toreador March. This does all relate to the visuals of the cutscene by referencing the destruction caused by the Fazbear's Fright fire, but the tone that it creates is one of despair. Michael himself sounds constantly tired.
They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
Imagine a scene in a movie where a character is on the verge of death, bleeding out, using their final moments to tell the protagonist something really important. That's the vibe I get from this. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if something along those lines was part of the direction Scott gave PJ. And I think that's a brilliant direction to take Michael's voice, considering he's literally dead. So of course he would sound like he has no energy left in him. Or maybe a better comparison would be like a robot shutting down.
We'll meet again, Marcus. This isn't over.
I'm going to come find you.
Scott's clarified that Michael wasn't actually meant to sound robotic in that line, he just meant to slow it down for dramatic effect. And I think that was a good call. Not just because the rest of what we got was perfect, but because the slowed effect, like a malfunctioning cassette or record player, just adds nicely to the creep factor of Michael's already ghoulish voice. It's here I feel I should bring up comments that PJ Haywood has made on Michael Afton, like this one from his Reddit AMA. Based on the custom night monologue, Michael sounds like he's trying to win his father's approval, which raises a couple questions in my mind, because doesn't he threaten William at the end?
Father, I'm going to kill you.
But at the same time, there is some evidence to infer a level of subservience from Michael toward William. He addresses William formally as his father, for one.
Father.
William was the one who sent him to circus babies.
It was right where you said it would be.
Additionally, and this is a slightly weaker point, but the quickness in the delivery of the line, "I did it," has always read to me as faint, almost childlike excitement and pride. And in FNAF 6, you can find a poster that depicts some kind of circus act, which can easily be connected to the Afton family. Looming above everyone is an old man with a dummy that looks a lot like himself, a parallel to William manipulating and controlling Michael like a puppet master. All of Haywood's comments on Michael Afton are really interesting to me. I suppose because, with so few lines, he had very little to gauge Michael's personality from compared to his other roles in FNAF, who get multiple lines in multiple contexts.
Turn back now and I'll spare your lives. Impossible!
And sometimes multiple appearances.
She's equipped with a built-in helium tank.
I always
always come back.
So, searching for which passages in this relatively short monologue gave PJ his exact impression of Michael made for a fun way for me to reevaluate my own view of this character. In the same AMA answer, he says it sounds like Michael is searching for answers, which I think comes across far clearer, due to a number of lines and especially how they're delivered. I believe some parts of this monologue were specifically directed by Scott to be read with an inflection that implies certain emotions. Lines like these are all spoken with a hint of what sounds like confusion or uncertainty.
They thought I was you. I put her back together, but something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not.
When told by someone on Reddit that Michael and William sound the same, PJ Haywood disagreed, citing that William is clearly up to no good, and Michael is broken. I love how simply he puts it. Scott has apparently summarized the essence of Michael's character for PJ, and given that he considers Michael a sympathetic and damaged character,
I think, again, Michael is a more sympathetic character, but also clearly damaged.
it would appear that those are the qualities that define Michael and separate him most from William, at least in this point in the story. I don't know how people could possibly confuse these two characters just by their voices. In fact, listen to William saying the same lines as Michael.
They didn't recognize me at first.
You may not recognize me at first.
I've been living in shadows.
I've been living in the shadows.
I'm going to come find you.
I'm going to come and find you.
It does not generate the same feeling of sympathy and frailty. Instead, it's more directly threatening and malicious. There's a difference between evil and creepy, and I think Michael and William's voices are great demonstrations of that.
She's equipped with a built-in helium tank for inflating balloons right at her fingertips.
She's free now.
She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
But something is wrong with me.
They may sound and look similar, but their characterization makes the ways that they differ from each other very apparent. So why did Scott decide Michael and William should have the same voice actor? Probably the same reason their sprites look so similar.
In terms of playing the two, it does allow you to explore two sides of what would otherwise be very similar people if it wasn't for their characters. I mean, William's dead and shambling around, Michael's dead and shambling around,
Michael's fully zombified sprite evokes the purple guy sprite that we associate with the killer. Not only for the sake of a red herring, but to represent the consequences of William's misdeeds falling onto Michael. He gets the blame from the spirits of the children, which is further reflected by this line.
They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
Coincidentally or not, this actually mirrors the community's reaction to Michael in Sister Location. We didn't know who the game's protagonist was at first, but then we thought it was William. Or how we initially assumed that Michael was the killer, based on those intermissionary cutscenes. Back to their voices being similar, it's not an unfamiliar trope in media for multiple characters to share a voice actor, much less characters who are father and son. If you'll forgive me for citing TV tropes here, this kind of double casting can and has been done to serve a dramatic purpose. To illustrate the son carrying on the beliefs or the legacy of the father. Sometimes for good, and sometimes making it more impactful when they choose not to make the same mistakes as the father. Michael wanted to impress his father, sought his approval, and would do his bidding as a means to that end. William and Michael were aligned forces for a time, and they both suffered the same fate, as explained by Michael and by the visuals of this cutscene.
But something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not.
Hell, it's possible that their deaths happened close together, as William was clearly still alive to give Michael instructions to find circus babies. But his whereabouts were apparently unknown after Michael began living in shadows. And as just a little more proof that these characters' journeys are meant to mirror each other, I refer back to the fact that they share a very noteworthy selection of voice lines.
They didn't recognize me at first.
You may not recognize me at first.
I've been living in shadows.
I've been living in the shadows.
I'm going to come find you.
I'm going to come and find you.
Haywood presumed that the reason he was contacted specifically to play Michael was to maintain consistency with the accent. But given that Scott was able to keep the continuity of the accent with Elizabeth by just requesting a British accent from the actor, this choice was more likely in service of the dramatic implications I've mentioned rather than convenience. I apologize for the small tangent, but I recently found out that some people don't actually like Michael's voice in the games, and I had to stand up for my boy because I love his voice. The following segment will consist of me breaking down every significant part of this monologue in order. First,
It was right where you said it would be.
This seems at first to just reiterate the fact that Michael was instructed by William to come here. But from a character perspective, and maybe it's just me, but when I listen to how he says this line, it comes across as Michael slyly implying that William could have been wrong or lying.
Well,
Father,
I made it, despite your directions.
You're supposed to be dead.
Which would line up with Michael's snarky characterization in other parts of the franchise, like his notes in the security logbook. By the same token though, this could be Mike appealing to William's ego. Like, oh, you're so smart and awesome and always right about everything, Father. You're just the best. When the music kicks in as Michael is talking about the animatronics not recognizing him.
they were all there. They didn't recognize me at first.
The track starts just as Mike pauses his sentence, as if to represent him suddenly realizing the tragic nature of everything that's happened to him as he begins to recount it all. The visuals beginning to fade in at the same time also contributes to this. It puts his slow, tired way of talking into a different perspective. Like, maybe it's not just because he's dead. Maybe it's because it hurts him to remember.
They thought I was you.
I always thought that the sound Michael makes here was an exhausted sigh, to tell us that he's physically and emotionally tired, or, again, that it pains him to recall what he's been through. The sound is clearly a substitute for some sentiment that Mike just can't bring himself to say out loud for one reason or another. But what is it that's being left unsaid? Given the dejection in his voice, another possibility I've thought of is, they thought I was you. Maybe they're right. But I've also seen people describe this sound as an awkward laugh, as if the idea of being mistaken for his father is funny to him. Finding humor in a dark situation would fit with how he's characterized elsewhere in the franchise, but a sigh would be more appropriate within the context of the rest of the monologue, so I can't really decide which interpretation I like better. Though I do think the fact this was included at all is a sign that Michael resents the idea that he looks like his father, which, come on Mike, that's literally how genetics work. How does Michael know the animatronics thought he was William, by the way? The only time the animatronics ever imply they think this is in the non-canon fake ending.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with her again?
I know it was an accident.
So I think the only possible answer is just that Michael is really good at reading passive aggression and realized that some of the things that Baby said to him would only make sense if they were directed at a different person.
I put her back together, just like you asked me to.
Michael's voice falters here, falling into a feeble whisper as he finishes his sentence. It almost sounds to me like he's afraid of being scolded, and so he preemptively defends himself, saying that he did exactly what he was supposed to. The act of putting someone back together is a recurring thing in FNAF, mentioned first in FNAF 4 by who we all assume to be William. Because of this, the fact that William asked Michael to put Elizabeth back together suggests that Michael is either something of an understudy in training to William, or a lapdog that William sends to do his dangerous dirty work for him. Just like you asked me to is further evidence that Michael was emotionally manipulated by William. Michael didn't put his sister back together because he decided to, or because he was told to, but because he was asked to. This makes it sound like William gave Michael a choice between freeing his sister and not, something which Michael would of course feel obliged to do. The music, not just here but throughout the cutscene, almost acts as the representation of Michael's welling emotions. It would be incomplete without the monologue, and vice versa. The moment I think this comes across best is when Michael talks about Elizabeth being free.
And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now.
Along with his voice shrinking here, the music becomes quieter, and the faint music box notes of Toreador March play, indicating a sense of nostalgic warmth, before being punctuated with a dramatic thud, to signify Michael being content with Elizabeth's fate, and switching his focus onto his own.
She's free now, but something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not.
The straightforward way Michael describes his current state as something being wrong with him is not just super ominous, but it really illustrates his distress. He is unfamiliar and scared at what he's become, so the words to properly describe what's happened escape him. The fact that Michael is alive is something he considers to be wrong with him, and he believes he should be dead. Maybe he wanted to die, or his death was part of the plan all along, and so he laments the fate that he was ultimately stuck with.
I've been living in shadows.
I really like how Michael brings up that he's been living in shadows. It kind of puts an image in my mind of rumors spreading around town of some cryptid that stalks the streets at night, hiding in alleyways and scavenging for survival. Michael's language suggests that he expected, or at the very least isn't fazed by the supernatural nature of what he's encountered, which makes his morality slightly more questionable, as he's aware that the animatronics beside Circus Baby display some level of sentience, and yet he shows no real interest in freeing any of them. Even if he does think he accomplished that somehow, he doesn't mention it here, suggesting that he only cares about the one he came here for. I love that FNAF never has any explicitly good characters. There's always some flaw in their mindset. I don't know, it makes them very human. I would say that the background of this cutscene being the burnt down Fazbear's Fright should be concrete evidence that Michael was the protagonist / responsible for the fire in FNAF 3, but apparently there's still debate over that, and entering theory territory seems like a slippery slope, so I'm just going to talk about something else.
There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you.
This isn't an inherently threatening sentence. There's only one thing left for him to do now implies he wants closure, to tie up loose ends, so it can be simply read as the culmination of Michael's search for answers. And the first time he says it, his tone almost makes this statement sound like a display of loyalty to William.
I'm going to come find you.
I've done what you asked, now I'm going to come back to you. But the slower reiteration of this line brings out the hostility in Michael's words.
I'm going to come find you.
We can only guess what exactly he planned to do once he found William, but we don't really have to know. Michael's speech is concise and eloquent. He says everything he thinks is necessary, which means that he knows if William ever hears this message, he will understand what is being left unsaid, and that's what makes it threatening. Imagine sending someone to their death, then getting a phone call from that person weeks later saying, "I lived.
I'm coming after you."
But how does Michael know that William will hear this? Well, I'm guessing he doesn't. His monologue isn't framed in any way that makes it clear in what context Mike is saying all this. Is he talking to himself? Pretending that William can hear him? The most likely answer is that this is a recorded message he's leaving for William. That's what makes the most sense to me, at least, as it's established that he's talking to his father, but that this isn't a face-to-face conversation, since Michael vows to find William. It's also an explanation for his distorted voice at the end. Not a good one, but it could work. Kinda. I don't think I've even scratched the surface of what this monologue says about Michael Afton, but I hope I've at least made it clear that there is something to be read into in that regard. That this cutscene isn't just exposition, and that Michael isn't just a non-character plot device. In the sister location opening, William Afton dodges a potentially incriminating question by feigning ignorance and bragging about his technical achievements. He is overly confident, not just in his ability to design, but in his ability to deceive. He's egotistical and obsessed with his work. So what does Michael Afton's behavior in this cutscene tell us about him? Michael is easy to trust people and often won't realize when he's being manipulated. He's emotionally vulnerable. He has a kind of morbid sense of humor, most likely a coping mechanism for the tragedy he's endured. He's damaged, he's sarcastic, he's morally grey, he's perfect. PJ Hayward has previously said that he was envious of Dave Steele's performance as Henry.
There's one person I'm envious of, and I think that's, did the voice acting of for Henry. That speech at the end was just great. It's not so much I would have wanted to do that character specifically. It's more a case of wow, that was really great. To me, there are a lot of subtle touches in there which kind of really spoke of acting.
But honestly, I think if William or Michael were ever given equal time to talk as Henry, he probably would have been able to deliver something just as good, if not better. I mean, Michael's monologue gets less than half the amount of time to shine as Henry's ending speech, and I still can't pick a favourite between these two. Help Wanted 2 appears to be returning to the setting of Sister Location, which was part of a saga of games that were very Afton family-centric, so I've had Michael on the brain far more than usual after that game's announcement. And with the movie looking to fill in a lot of the ambiguity with Michael's characterization in the games, many are preemptively calling Mike Schmidt the better Mike. Don't do that. The game version of the character may not have gotten a lot of screen time, but that doesn't mean his characterization wasn't there. And besides, can't we love both Mikes equally? 2 hands, guys. 2 hands. If you survived this far into the video, congratulations. And thank you for hanging in there. Don't forget the Aftons are British. Bye bye!
Something is wrong with me.